Without fail, every single show that has ever existed within media has cut content, and of course, like the previous two videos before this, I have been no stranger to diving into these concepts. And let's be honest, they are just a very fun thing to look into, because it does provide that interesting what if into every single show that you watch, and Ninjago certainly has had some interesting ones. So like I said, I have two videos that came before this that did dive into the concepts that we have already looked at, and I've gotten up to season 10 at this point. So if you do want to see the cut content for those ones, please look at the videos down below. But other than that, welcome to part 3 of cut content, where I'm going to be looking through the Wild Brain era. But to be more specific, in this episode I'm going to be taking a look at Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu through until Crystallized, and then to knock off the end of this little mini-series, I will then be covering Dragon's Rising in the final part. So if you do want to see that, stay tuned because it will come soon. But for today, let's take a look at the Wild Brain era. So in the seasons that came before these ones, I did aim to only cover one piece of cut content from each, but in these later seasons, the amount of knowledge that we do know seems to narrow down, so I will explain to you every single piece of cut content that we are aware of for these seasons. And let's start with Season 11. Now there is only one bit of cut content for this season, and that will be coming from the final episode, where the fate of Boreal was going to be much different to what we saw. Now of course, in the final product, we got to see Kai be able to use his power of fire to be able to defeat the dragon, but it was originally going to end a bit differently from that. And I'm going to be perfectly honest, it is much more gruesome, because in this original fate, Boreal was going to be taken over by Nia, and she was going to proceed to rip off its wings instead of crushing it. And I'm going to be honest, that is extremely gruesome. Now I'm going to be honest, I don't know whether or not I prefer this fate or not, because I do think it would be a very interesting scene to see, but at the same time, I do like the fact that Kai got his moment to shine in this instance. So I do think ultimately I do prefer what we ended up with, but this is not to say that this variant does not have its merits. Because let's be honest, I do feel like Nia being able to destroy a dragon's wings would be a very cool bit of scenery to see, but it would also be a bit too dark in my opinion, especially considering they were trying to be a little more lighthearted after the Oni trilogy. But like with any of these pieces of cut content, please let me know if you do prefer this outcome for Boreal, because personally, I do think it would have been interesting like I said, but ultimately I am happy with the final product. But that is the only piece of cut content that we're aware of for Season 11, so let's move on to Season 12. And I will say Season 12 does actually have two different bits of content to actually go through, which I do think is very interesting to see, because this season was a little more locked down, especially in comparison to Season 11. But the first one is that the season itself was going to be connected more to Jay's biological mother, and it was going to be the idea that she was actually going to be the one powering the game of Prime Empire. And the byproduct piece of cut content from this was that it was going to also explore Jay's mother's relationship with Jay's father. And I'm going to be honest, outside of the fact that they're biologically his parents, we actually don't know too much about them. So it would have been a very nice thing to see expanded on. But unfortunately, we do not know why this piece of content was actually cut. But I do hope one day it pops its way back up. But fortunately, Prime Empire did have one other bit of cut content, and it was actually going to be an episode, and it was going to see the yellow Kitana stolen by the rats, and then we would have seen the ninja and the League of J attempting to get the key back, but that is where they learned that the key was meant to fix their home, so the ninja would let them keep the key until they needed it back once more. And again, this would have been a very good episode of Prime Empire, because personally speaking, I do think the Prime Empire episodes are a bit too broken apart, and they don't really flow the best between each other, so it would have been nice to have little episodes here and there that hopefully would have helped bridge the gap. But unfortunately, we just never got to see this came to be, and while I am happy with Prime Empire as a whole, I do wish we did get something like this ultimately, because again, it would have just helped bridge between the episodes. But that is it in terms of Prime Empire, and both of those pieces of cut content I really do wish remained within the show itself, but unfortunately we never got to keep them. But we are now going to move on to Season 13. And in similar vein to Season 12, Season 13 does actually have two pieces of cut content associated with it. One being that it was going to explore the illness of Lily during the season itself, which would have been a very fascinating concept to explore, but I think it was a bit too serious of a topic to to actually go into, which is what is ultimately a kids show. But it would have been interesting to learn the fate of Lily herself. But I am happy with what we did get, because we did get to see more into the more fighting side and the younger side of her in comparison to a more sadder time. And I'm going to be honest, we do kind of get the understanding of what happened to her. We do understand that the illness, or whatever it was, does eventually become her fate. So we don't really need to know too much more in the grand scheme of things, but it would still be nice to know fully what happened with her. But ultimately, I do think we are happy with what we ended up getting. But as for the other bits of cut content, this is potentially the one thing I would have liked to have seen across every single one of these seasons, because the ending of The Son of Lily was going to be very different. And I would have seen the Geckos and the Munts building a statue of Cole next to Lily in the heart of a mountain, but unfortunately this was only cut due to the running time. And it has been stated by one of the team that Cole's statue was actually built as far as he was concerned. So it is nice to think that this still actually happened, we just never saw it. And if we do take another look at the script, we do actually see that the statue of Lily was going to give a motherly smile of love and pride to the statue of Cole. And honestly, that would have been such a perfect ending to such a fantastic season. So, as far as I'm concerned, this did actually happen, and everyone who was working on the team seems to also think so. So, in my opinion, the statue of Cole does actually exist. Now this is where I thought we'd be going on to the island, but as far as we are aware, there is not actually any sort of public cut content to the actual season itself, or to the special itself, depending on how you look at it. But unfortunately, there's nothing to actually cover for those episodes, which is a shame because I do personally love the island. But let's just go straight through to Seabound. And Seabound only actually has one piece of cut content that we are aware of, which is a shame because that season is so fantastic and also was one of the more stunted seasons because of COVID. But let's see what Seabound actually has. And wait a minute, it is just the name of the season. Yes, that is right, we do know absolutely nothing about the content of the season itself. All we actually know is that the season initially was not called Seabound, and it was actually called The Abyss. And I will say, that is a very cool name, but the thing is that it doesn't really give as much apart from the fact that it's just to do with something that's ultimately dark, which is the sea. But I do think Seabound is a much better name because it gives the point across a bit better and is a nice reference to Skybound. But I just cannot believe that that is the only thing we actually have to do with Seabound. But yes, that is it. So let's move over to Crystallized. And Crystallized does actually have a few more bits of cut content that we're actually aware of. The first one is that Crystallized was going to have a more of a spider theme for the season itself, and it was going to begin with Harumi returning as a spider-like cyborg. But unfortunately, it was overturned because of Monkey Kid, because they already had the same season theme as an idea just before this one released. Which is a shame because it's unfortunate to see that LEGO shows do have ideas scrapped because of other LEGO shows. Because ultimately, I don't think it should matter, but if LEGO are concerned about it, then it is what it is. But it is still nice because I don't think the spider theme would have been as good as a talking point as they probably initially thought. But I will say the only thing I somewhat like from this idea is the spider-looking Harumi. But while it's honestly kind of terrifying, let's be honest, I do think it's still a very cool idea, but ultimately speaking, I think I am glad that Harumi returned as a human, because I think her redemption wouldn't have been as meaningful if she was a spider cyborg. But let's move on to the next one. Because I will say the next one again is probably a personal favourite of mine because I do really enjoy Season 6. And that is that Narakan was originally going to be a part of the Crystal Council, which would have been amazing. But unfortunately the idea was scrapped because they thought it was too complicated to explain his return. And let's be perfectly honest, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're gutted about this. Because Narakan is one of the most sought after characters to actually return, and the fact that we never actually got him is such a shame. And honestly, the way they would have brought him back was kind of hilarious. Honestly, the fact that the plan for it was that Clutch Powers was simply going to drop the Teapot of Tyran, honestly, it's kind of hilarious. And if Narakan's first ambition was to join the council, I honestly would have been surprised. Because if we look at it from an objective standpoint, Narakan would have been like he was at the start of Season 6, where he would have wanted to just go back home. So I'm wondering how they would have gotten him to join the council when by all accounts he thought that the Ninjago realm was still restored. But unfortunately it wasn't, of course. But again, this would have just been a fantastic little thing to have, because when the season of Crystallize was actually coming out, everyone wanted either Narukhan or the Time Twins to come back, and the fact that one of them was meant to honestly kind of is gutting to see. But ultimately, I do think it would have been too complicated, like they said, but it probably would have been hilarious at the same time. But that does actually bring us to the final bit of cut content for the season of Crystallized, and that was that the ending was going to be very different. It was actually going to see Garmadon fully die. He was going to be written out of the show again, and it was going to result in Lloyd becoming his Oni form, but this time not being able to break out of it. However, when Oni Lloyd was in this position, he would have destroyed the Overlord with that power instead of the Golden Ultra Dragon, and he would have taken the throne of the Crystal King itself. And we actually did see this in the set Lloyd's Golden Ultra Dragon, where we see only Lloyd on the throne. But we would have seen the ninja ultimately defeat Lloyd and take away the Oni form. And honestly, this would have been a cool ending, but I'm again glad that we didn't get it. Because I'm gonna be honest, if Lloyd did rely on his dark side to be able to defeat the Overlord, I think it would have been a bit bittersweet. And instead seeing Lloyd use the powers of creation to destroy him, I think is a lot better of an ending ultimately, because it got the ninja involved, and it showed that Lloyd did not need Oni power like Garmadon initially thought. Also, let's be honest, having Garmadon being killed off would have just been a bit of a shame to see, because Garmadon has so much potential now he's back on his good guy arc, or trying to get there at the very least, so I do think keeping him around is ultimately the best idea. But let's be honest, if he did end up dying, it probably would have made for a cool or emotional scene, but ultimately, I am happy with what we got in the end. But that is it in terms of the cut content for the Wild Brain era, and next episode will be covering Dragon's Rising itself. But that is initially the run of Ninjago, and that's the initial show completely done, because technically now we're going to be moving on to the secondary or sequel show. But this is where I'll be leaving it down to you guys. Across every single season that we've covered so far, what was your favourite bit of cut content? What was your least favourite bit of cut content? I would love to know. And ultimately, I do really think a lot of these concepts should have made their way into the show. But I do understand why some of them didn't. But like I said, that is about it when it comes to cut content of Ninjago. And again, stay tuned for episode 4 and let me know which one was your favourite, because I have a feeling that a lot of you are gonna say Narukhan. But that is about it for this episode, and I do hope you enjoyed. Also, side note for the real ones, I'm actually using a new mic now. So if this episode or anything sounded different, it's because I'm getting used to a new mic. But other than that, like I said, thank you guys for watching. Take care, okay, bye!